Let's talk about the climate. The UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, as it's called. It's shortened to COP26. This will be in Glasgow from the end of October to almost mid-November. Big deal for Scotland, Britain and the planet. But today's Daily Mail reveals that the man Boris Johnson put in charge of COP26 and saving the planet, Alok Sharma, has flown during lockdown to 30 countries, including 6 on the red list. In fact, the Mail says that at the moment he's in Brazil, which is on the red list. Downing Street says sometimes face-to-face talks are essential and that the rules allow for ministers to travel and be exempt from quarantine. The Labour MP David Lammy expressed his dismay on Sky News.
The optics are very clear. It's one rule for them and another rule for us, whether it's Dominic Cummings, whether it's Matt Hancock, whether it's Alok Sharma. And I've got to say, look, of course, some international travel is required. But this amount of international travel, when your climate change minister, feels to be bizarre and feels to not be setting an example, particularly when there's quite widespread criticism of Britain's response to COP just 100 days to go. So I think this is worrying, but it's more of the same from a government that really feels like the rules do not apply to them and their ministers and their class and groups of friends.
That's David Lammy. Live on LBC, Tom Burke, who chairs E3G, a climate think tank and former advisor to the government on the environment. Welcome back to the programme, Tom. Good to have you. Let's just unpick this a little, if we may. How important is it, do you think, to physically fly and visit people for Alok Sharma as he prepares for COP26?
I think it's absolutely essential. The level of diplomacy that we've got to accomplish in order to get agreement that will be useful out of COP is enormous. And that relies fantastically on people trusting each other at a governmental level. And Alok's job as the president of COP is to go around all of the countries that are going to play an important part and make sure that we've heard and understood what's their concern so that he's in a position to map out the sort of ground at which we can struggle for agreement at the end in the end game of this. So I think it's absolutely essential. I think people who don't see the importance of that are simply revealing their ignorance of what diplomacy actually takes.
Does it have to be quite so much travel, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is more difficult than any piece of diplomacy the world's ever tried to do. So, and we're seeing day after day just how urgent the problem is becoming. We're hearing constantly how far behind the place we need to be we are. And so, yes, putting in the hours is the issue. And frankly, you can't do on Zoom the trust building that you need to do to get international agreement. You really can't do that.
But the charge from David Lammy, other people have expressed it, about one rule for them and one rule for others. Dominic Cummings mentioned in the course of his clip. You can have your view, which is that this travel is justified, but does David Lammy and others, do they also have a point?
They have an important political point, but not a substantive point. Look, there is always going to be, and there are indeed exemptions for people who have to do essential travel and not just ministers. And my view is this travel is essential, so it's not breaking the rules. However, I do understand why people feel outraged about it as yet another example of something that the Prime Minister is totally responsible for. He shows no inclination to obey any of the rules any of the time. So, of course, when people see something like this, their first instinct is to say, yet another example of something that's become a consistent pattern for this government of ministers doing one thing and everybody else being asked to do another thing. So I understand the response. I don't think it's justified in this case. But if we want to change that, the Prime Minister needs to start setting a better example than he does.
I suppose we must wait until November to see how successful Alok Sharma has been. But Downing Street, responding to some questions about this today, did say that immediately following his visit to Japan and to South Korea, the governments there committed to ambitious net zero targets, which was a key ask from the UK. So the indication that this travel is already paying dividends.
I think it's certainly paying dividends in that sort of way, but much more substantively than just simply those sort of, as it were, self-aggrandizing headlines for us. It's actually building the kind of global consensus that needs to be built. That's the job of the president of the COP. It's the prime minister's job to get the leaders to actually support and get behind the kind of consensus that Alok is out there identifying as the possible grounds for agreement.
Thanks for talking to us once again. Tom Burke, who chairs E3G, a climate think tank, and was an advisor to the government on the environment.